Well, the book I really am hoping we'll focus on today is your book, Necessary Endings. And, I have the humbling privilege of getting to help lead 150 churches in Florida. And
I'm so sorry.
well, it's like herding cats at times.
Well, being a pastor, I always say there's two jobs I would never want. Being a pastor and being the head pro at a golf club.
I would never be the head pro at a golf club.
You have 100 bosses.
Right.
Everybody's got an opinion on why you should change this.
Right. Being pastor's close, yes. Well, if there's a book that I beg the leadership teams of our local churches to read, it's this book. I just think it's enormously helpful. So I'm looking forward to talking about it with you this morning. You quote in the book, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, and you say, I want to read it, "Great is the art of beginning, but greater is the art of ending." So why are endings so important, and why are we so horrible at them?
Well, those are two good questions. Well, first of all, they're important for two reasons. One is that they are built into the created order. If you go to, everybody's heard the bird song, to everything,
right?
Turn, 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 there's the season.
Right.
And you go to Ecclesiastes, and in chapter 3, it has this just progression of, these sort of polarities, and to everything there's a season, a time for every activity under heaven, a time to plant, and a time to uproot what's been planted,
right?
A time to sow, a time to reap, a time to embrace, a time to refrain from embracing. Mm-hmm. And everybody's heard that, and it never hit me until I started writing the book, and I was kind of, what do you put in here? And I went back to that passage, and the whole thing is about endings. Mm-hmm. That God has built seasons, and for the next season to begin, one has to end. And we'll get to why we're not good at that, but we do fail to recognize that sometimes we can continue the activities of one season thinking that's the whole run of the game, when really what's required to get a relationship or a ministry or a business to the next level, you have to have the right activities of that season. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of times we don't recognize that. Another thing is, even in when things are going great, seasons change, and we have to change what we're doing in order for them to continue to be great. And there's, you can see this throughout the church world. Mm-hmm. There was a time when how'd you have evangelism? Well, once a year you brought in the evangelist. Right. We had a revival,
Right.
And then that changed to empowering people to be able to share their faith, and
right.
And the way we do church has to change, and churches sometimes that hold on to the old ways right. and don't change. I don't mean changing the gospel or anything like that, but the ways you do it.
Right.
If you can't see when a season has ended and realize you're in a new season and continue what shouldn't change, but change what you have to change, that's a big problem. And that's just in normal life.
Right.
And we can go into 1,000 ways that's true. But that's only part of it. The more difficult one is that we live in a fallen world. Mm-hmm. And so while God is, patient with everyone and wants everyone to come to repentance, there are certain people that don't. And the Bible is very clear that some relationships must end.
Right.
For good things to
right.
happen. One example that I never understood when I was, before I became a, characterological scientist, if you will, because I have to study people's makeup. And you know, there's all this stuff in the Bible throughout of forbearing and patience and 8,000 chances and forgiveness and all of that. Then you come over here to Paul's letters, and he says, reject a divisive person after a second warning. And I used to read that, and I would go, well, where's the grace? You know, where's the patience? Where's the long suffering? I go, why would he say that? And then once I understood the real world, that it's really interesting, he says, after a second warning, because, you know, you think of divisiveness in a church or on an elder board or, you know, within a congregation. A lot of times it happens kind of innocently because people are too afraid to be direct, and they'll have the meeting after the meeting, and now we got two factions at the table. Nobody's really talking. But a lot of times that's maybe they're conflict avoidant, or they're passive aggressive, or they're just afraid to stand up. And you go tell them, you know, that's not helpful. Bring it into the meeting. Okay. Well, as Proverbs says, you know, correct a wise person and they'll change. And so they go, I'm sorry, and I won't do that. And then we're fine. They do it again. Well, everybody's got a little bit of a learning curve, so you tell them again. But if they continue in it, you don't have a weakness usually or a slip up or whatever. What you've got is a different category of person the scriptures are clear about, that they are divisive. They have an agenda. And they're not going to submit and get with the program and work with the team. They are trying to divide this place. And so that's why, like, a cancer has to be cut out. Matthew 18 says the same thing. You go and go and go, and then finally you have to separate. And in a fallen world, to preserve goodness, there are many times when something's got to end. And so it's those two big categories. And then I do a lot of CEO consulting and work with businesses and, you know, entities. And the way the book came about is I'm not smart enough to sit on a rock and wait for the next idea. You know, I'm a practitioner. And so all of my books have come out. I always say the work writes the books. And I tend to write books about real stuff that I'm seeing over and over and over. And I wish there were a book I could give these people. And if there's not one, that's when I do it. And what I was seeing over and over were very good leaders and strong leaders. And so many of them had this one spot inside of them where they couldn't pull the trigger to end something, shut down a strategy they were attached to, go in a different direction, even leave where they were, or so often fire somebody that should be fired, and they couldn't do it. And so I got deep into studying the dynamics of how can this otherwise brilliant person not do what needs to be done. And there you go. And so I kept seeing this, and that's when I got deeply into trying to organize what's an easy way to help people understand this path. Because sometimes there's a chapter in there called unnecessary endings. Hope is, you know, one of the great virtues. But if you're on a wrong road, continuing to hope it's going to turn into the right road, then you got to do a U-turn. And so a lot of times there would be a real reason to have hope if you were doing the things that could bring that person to a place where there's hope. So some endings are unnecessary because people throw their hands up and say there's nothing we can do. But then on the other side, everything that can bring about a change has been done, and at that point, an ending is necessary.
It's time.
And then sometimes in our personal lives, you know, we've been going down a path that is very fruitful and might be good, but God called Abraham out of Ur, not knowing where he was going.
That's true.
It's time to end what you're doing, pal. Do something new.
Yeah, that's true.
And how many times you see in Scripture, behold, I'm about to do a new thing. Mm-hmm. But letting go, one of my favorite, I shouldn't say, well, favorite because it's hard to say because it's a bit negative, but there's this little verse like a speed bump in the New Testament. Remember Lot's wife.
Mm-hmm.
She couldn't let go.
Right.
And she turned back and turned to, she's still out there in the desert somewhere.
Yeah, she's a pillar of salt.
But our spiritual growth, our business growth, our personal maturity, marriages, family, all of them require the ability to let go of things. It's hard.
Well, you write about, which makes total sense, about John 15 and being the vine and being pruned, and how Jesus talks about our Father pruning us. And then you kind of go into the types of necessary endings. Can you describe those types of necessary endings, and if you think any are particularly impactful for the local church or for pastors? Well,
narrow it down for me, because I talk about a lot of different types and a lot of parts of it. Which ones were coming to mind for you?
Well, let's go to the book and pull it up. Well, you talk about these three types of necessary endings, and that's in, let's see what chapter. It's in chapter 2, where you talk about growth depends on getting rid of the unwanted or the superfluous.
Those are the three you're talking about.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is in what I did was I was trying to find an organizing principle for the book, and as I went through the scriptures, it keeps saying this thing called pruning.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, because one of my biggest beliefs is that we can get to so much deeper understanding of God's truth by looking at the created order. And I was looking for a guiding metaphor. I kept seeing pruning. And pruning are endings.
Mm-hmm.
This sounds weird. I got deep into the science of pruning. I went to some of the big universities and had them explain the science of pruning to me, and the people that do all that. I flew to Tuscany and met with the number one winemaker in the world, who won the number one wine 3 times. And he walked me through the vineyards and explained the science of pruning and why pruning is necessary for getting to your vision.
Sure.
And then I began to look at this, and here's what all of the experts told me about pruning. That you prune, back to your question, you prune in three separate scenarios.
Okay.
See, a lot of times we think of pruning as, oh gosh, I can't see my house anymore.
Right.
It's a mess, right? So I need to prune stuff, or I need to clean out my garage or whatever.
Right.
When there's a problem. Well, that's not what people do. If you're trying to grow a rose that's a champion rose, what they do is they don't start and go in cutting things. And they all told me this, and it was amazing how consistent this was. You start with your vision. What do I want this road? What am I trying to build here? What am I trying to create? And then you prune towards the vision. So what happens is, they said you prune in 3 types of pruning, and they don't do it when it's needed. They do it as a discipline.
Interesting. Okay.
It's like tooth cleaning.
Mm-hmm.
You're supposed to go in every, 6 months or so.
Right.
It is a discipline that they do to get to the vision. And there's 3 types. Number 1, a rose bush, for example, produces more buds than it can sustain to full fruition. Which means all of this stuff is taking the resources of the vine. Well, they ask the first question. Because all of them are good and healthy that they're looking at. all of them are good and healthy, but they're not the best.
Right.
Now, the good ones are taking up resources. So they will cut very good buds and branches and all that would grow into roses, because the ones that fit the vision are the ones that need that time and money, right? You take a church, over time we build more and more stuff, and you keep adding more and more stuff.
Right.
But you got 15 ministries going on. And some of them may have had their season, this and the other, and there's still, people are coming and all this. But the vision is to be this: those rooms, those buildings, those dollars, those people, those donations, all of that could be used to make this go to what it's supposed to be, if we were able to let go of some good things that aren't the best.
Right.
Okay? People's lives are like this.
Right.
Over time, you join this committee and this group and this and the other. Well, let's say it's time you want to really work on, for the next year, we want to focus on our marriage. Well, there may be some activities that are taking up our time that we need to let go of so we can join a good couples group or a community or go on retreats. And so that's the first one: good, not best. The second one is there are some branches that are sick and they're not getting well.
Right.
Now, the Bible and all of business leadership will tell you, and as a psychologist, we treat the things that are sick to make them well. But there are some that, when you've done everything to fix something and you realize more is not going to help. I mean, I think I use the example, it's been a while now, I'm an author. And if you had told me Borders would not exist,
Right.
like a couple of years before it didn't exist,
Right.
that was a business model, like a church model. It was not going to, we're not going to all of a sudden fix the wrong model to make it work. And you got to morph to a different way of getting people to read books,
Sure.
right? And so there are some things that we're involved in, and we may love them. I mean, why did it take General Motors 40 years of Pontiac not making a profit to finally say, you know what, we got to prune this?
Right.
So sometimes it's just not going to work. I grew up in the South. I think I put this in the book. We had hunting dogs, and we had a saying: that dog ain't going to hunt. And you take them out as much, and you do the training, and you put them in the house. That's a pet. That's not a hunting dog, right?
Right.
You can't teach a pig to sing. Music's bad, and it frustrates the pig, right? So sometimes it's not going to change.
Right.
And if you don't want to be having the same conversation 6 months from now, or a year from now, or 2 years from now that you've had for the over and over and over, the Bible is very clear. Some things aren't going to change, and they have to be pruned. And then there's a third type, which is just some are dead; they're taking up space. And so to get a diagnostic, and I've had businesses and executive teams and people just put those three categories up. Here's all the things we're involved in. What's category 1? What's category 2? What's category 3? And it really helps.
I wish I could get our churches to learn that. Yeah. And
Well-
we want to hang on to a ministry that was effective 40 years ago, but it's not effective.
Or we don't want to
40 years
hurt
later.
Mabel's feelings, who leads that ministry.
Exactly.
That's the big one.
That's exactly right. That's right.
We love Mabel.
That's
but-
right.
And she
You don't
served
upset
us
Mabel.
for a long time. And
That's
you don't
right.
want to upset Mabel.
That's right.
And here's one. Mabel's nephew's our biggest donor.
That happens all the time.
How about that?
How would you deal with that? What would you say to that if Mabel's nephew is the biggest donor to the church?
Well, first thing I would do is, God bless you guys for what you've done here. And I think we agree of why you did it. See, if we get to the why, you've been wanting to reach people and have them grow.
Right.
And then I would, because we got to start with, what do we share? We both share the vision. And then I would try to get them to align with us on the vision. And then from there, bring them along to, let's do it this way, and here's a different role for you. That's probably the best. But you know what? Sometimes,
They might not.
I mean, frankly, they may be too narcissistic. They may be too entitled.
Right.
And once you start to give to entitlement, you are done. And sometimes you have to say, well, I think apparently God's got a different direction for us than where you want to go, or vice versa. And so we may need to part ways.
Talk a little
And
bit.
you know what? The biggest thing there is fear.
Okay.
Because people, they're hoarders.
Yeah.
If you go to a hoarder's garage, try to help them, you go over and pick up something, say, how long has it been since you used this? Oh, 20 years. Well, let's throw this away. No!
Right.
And what's the next thing they say? You say, why not?
I might need that.
I might need that. So what happens is leadership gets overly dependent on one person, one role, their contributions, whatever it is, and they're afraid. But what we see is when you prune it, you ever seen a rose bush the day after pruning? It doesn't look good.
Right.
And you're probably going to go through a dip.
Right.
And you're probably going to go through some conflict. You know, take a splinter out, it's going to bleed. But if if you're going to remodel your house, there's some 6 months and about 40% more money than they told you. And it's supposed to be 2 months. There's going to be, some conflict and trouble and loss and all of that. But if God has called you to a particular vision, and it's a good one and it's the right one, then you're going to go through that.
Right. Some short-term pain to get to long-term gain.
Yes, I can't tell you how many times I've worked with CEOs and their teams, and I go do all the interviews, and I come back and I say, I got good news for you. You are one firing away from success. For one of two reasons. Either the chair that person is in, you need what that chair could provide. That person's not providing it from that chair, and they're not going to.
Right.
But we need that chair. Or they're just really bad behavior.
Right.
But they get dependent on that person.
Right.
No, but he's got a lot of accounts, or they've got a lot of people that follow them, or this and the other. And sometimes you got to hit the road.
That's right. And the short-term pain is necessary to get to the long-term vision.
I always say to an audience, how many of you married your prom date?
Very few, right.
And there'll always be a hand or
always one or
two.
two,
I go, you're the
right,
exception that proves the rule. But what would your life have been like if you had continued to date that person?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
You, in chapter 4, you talk about Martin Seligman and learned helplessness. And first of all, could you maybe talk about what learned helplessness is? And you talk about the 3 Ps in there. It makes me think about, and I don't know how much you know about our kind of denominational drama we come out of, but
I grew up in it.
Well, you did. Well, we've kind of come through it. We've separated the Global Methodist Church
Oh, you're
now.
talking about
I am, yeah. We're
big-
the theologically conservative drama. No, I mean like the denominational kind of theological drama that we've been through. But I think back to where we've come from, and I think there was a lot of learned helplessness where we came out of. I feel like we were managing decline most of the time. It does not feel that way anymore.
Oh,
It feels like we're just moving forward in gangbusters. But I think that might be helpful for folks to hear you talk some about learned helplessness and what it is and how it impacts churches and those sorts of things.
Well, the term came about from some research. I think Seligman might have even done that original stuff, where they took dogs, and I think it's dogs. I'm pretty sure it's dogs, and they put them on a platform. Think of rug that had electric shock.
Oh, okay.
This is back before PETA, I guess.
Yeah, they wouldn't do that today.
You can do a lot of stuff with animals.
Right.
So they'd shock the dog, and they had a lever. And the dog, this is operant conditioning, when you do something good and you get a reward. Well, negative reinforcement is when something negative is happening and you do something that ends the pain, that behavior is rewarded.
Right.
Negative reinforcement is not punishment, that's a third one. Negative reinforcement is when I have pain and I do something that ends the pain, that something gets reinforced.
Right.
Okay? So the dogs would learn quickly, you get shocked, hit that, and it turns it off. So they had one of the most important human faculties that God has built into the creation. It's agency. Self-control is a fruit of the Spirit. We should have control of certain things. Now, we're not omni-control, but we should have self-control. And we should be able to hit levers in life that bring about the ending of pain. Or, we get a cookie, right?
Right.
I mean, simplest example, you're thirsty, you do something, and it ends your thirst. You have control over results that affect your life. So that's what these dogs had. Well, then what they did was they unplugged the lever. Okay, so the dogs are getting shocked, they hit the lever, it doesn't help. They hit it again, it doesn't help. And they start hitting it again, it doesn't help. And finally, they learned that they're helpless to change the pain that they're in, because it's being caused by things outside of their control.
Right.
So what they did was they withdrew and they got depressed. Now here's where the big learning comes. Then they removed the little fence. All the dog's got to do is step off the rug.
Right.
They didn't move. Because they had learned, I'm powerless. I'm a victim. I can't do anything. So then they start to study this dynamic. And, I would say, well, what happens in learned helplessness, if somebody's in a situation where things outside of their control are bringing them pain and suffering, like you're talking about, a lot of people that whatever, they can't solve the denominational problems, but it's ruining their lives. Right? It's outside of their control. Then the software changes in the brain. And what happens is a program starts running that we call the 3 Ps. And it is an interpretive mindset of when things happen, I interpret them with 3 Ps. First of all, I personalize it. Meaning, well, nobody's coming to church because I'm a loser. Whatever made me think I could be a pastor, whatever made me think I could be a leader, it's businesses, we didn't do the sale, whatever made me think I could, and there is an event and it gets interpreted as I'm defective in some way.
Right.
Okay? Single person gets rejected for a date, well, nobody will ever want me. Okay? So it's personal. Secondly, it starts to go pervasive. Well, it's not just that person rejected me, they're all going to reject me.
Right.
And it's not just my dating life, my work, my careers, it's not just my career, the whole economy, it goes all bad. So we have this pervasive sense when we're in learned helplessness that my whole life sucks. church works like this. It's not just this denomination. It's the spiritual condition of America is impossible. They'll never be able, and it all goes back.
Right.
The third P is the nail in the coffin. And it goes permanent. It's not just this month. It's not just this year. It's always going to be this way. And we lose hope. And once that happens, the big takeaway here is they lose agency and they stop doing the things that could make it better.
Right.
And a big example, I think I might have put it in there, I think. It might have been in Boundaries for Leaders. In the big financial crash of '08, I was doing a lot of work on Wall Street because that was a leadership crisis. I mean, it got really bad. If everybody recalls.
Very much so.
And you had people just had gotten into learned helplessness. And financial advisors, for example. And I sat with them in one of the big Wall Street firms, and you had the highest performers. They were sitting at their desks depressed. They'd say, I can't pick up the phone. Can't call a client. And the learned helplessness had set in. And then you had this other subset, they were thriving. And went in and studied them. And without being trained, and then we trained everybody else, but they were doing what I would prescribe, is they were saying, and actually wrote a program for them. We took 10,000 financial advisors through this. Okay, I want you to write down one column. These are all of the things outside of your control. You can't do anything about it. The economy, the interest rates, the banks closing, the election. These are all things you can do nothing about.
Right.
That are affecting you. I want you to write them down, and I want you to really obsess about them and drive yourself nuts worrying about it for 15 minutes every day. Because the brain needs to go through that loop, because it's going to keep coming. So we need to go through this processing thing. But let's put a limit on it. You see the psalmists go through this all the time. They'll put it all out there, and they get it out and go through the loop, and then they come back to
They lament
what's true,
Yeah.
right? So then we're going to move over to column 2. These are the things I do have control of. And I can get to work on those. And then that's when they start to thrive. And the depression lifts, the anxiety lifts, and results start to happen. So,
And see, I could see that working in a church.
oh my gosh.
Because I'll talk to church leaders who I think have got learned helplessness, where they think, well, American culture has just turned anti-Christian. We'll never be able to reach people for Christ. It just won't happen. And we're not going to start anything new. We're not going to try anything
That's
new.
right, they give up.
Right.
And if they would look over here, there are some that are booming.
Of course there are.
So what are they doing? We're not doing.
Right.
I could do that.
Right. And we've got to.
And you may have to have some necessary endings to some traditions you
Exactly.
you have to give up in order to do that.
Exactly.
You may need to do a lot of things.
Right.
But there's this powerlessness is the big cancer in those instances. Because as long as you have breath, there is something you can do that will have an effect. Because back to the created order, we live in a cause and effect universe.
Right. One of my absolute favorite parts of
Now, you may not be able to have an effect on what you think is cause that you can't control.
You may not.
But you
Right,
can do
right.
something.
Absolutely. Right.
I remember one financial advisor I talked to, he said, I can't call my clients. And I go, why? He says, well, because they all hate me. I said, how many you have? He says, 250. He said, I said, they all hate you. He said, yeah, they all think I caused this. I didn't cause this, but they hate me. I said, wait a minute. We're in Manhattan. How many clients do you think there are in Manhattan? And he goes, I don't know, a couple of million. I go, so you're 250 hate you. Well, you're telling me a million or two that hate their guy.
Right.
So here's what I want you to do. Every cocktail party, every PTA meeting, wherever you are, a soccer game, in conversations, just say, so are you happy with the financial results you've been getting this year? And that person's going to say, no, it's been terrible. Say, well, you want a second opinion? That's what I do. They can do that.
Right.
And then you saw people begin to move.
There is hope.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think my very favorite part of this book, and I want you to, if you would, to talk about it. I love when you classify employees into wise, foolish, and evil. And I can't.
Employees, relatives, extended family.
It would. That's right. Yeah, it would. That's right. And I can't tell you in my role how many times I'm called into a church when they've got a staff person that they knew they needed to let go 3 years ago, but they wouldn't. I call it terminal niceness because we're Christians,
or
and so
extremely codependent.
well, I'm sure it is. Would you talk about what it means to have those categories of wise, foolish, and evil, and what we should do with them, particularly in the church world, with staff and those sorts of things?
Yeah, and again, life and Scripture will tell you the same things. Psychiatry and psychology has always talked about these kind of three categories, if you will, that there are people that have issues that are workable with just working on it. Tell them something, they'll go, oh, that's a good idea. I'll try that, and I'll change. There's a second group of what we call character disorders. And the character disorders, see, a neurotic in the old terms, all of us, right? I say a mature person, we're not perfect, but, hopefully on a good day, we are the kind of person that when the truth comes to us, we adjust ourselves to do what the truth requires.
Right.
Step on your toe, and you tell me, hey, you stepped on my toe. Oh, you're right, I'm sorry. Okay, or you're not, I need you to change this way you work. Oh, thanks for telling me. You adjust to reality. A character disorder, you bring them the truth, they adjust the truth to meet their reality, who they are. They'll deny it, minimize it, excuse it, blame it. The problem's never in the room.
Right.
Okay? And that's the character disorder. And then there's this other group that, you go to the sociopaths and the psychopaths, that's a different deal. Well, you go to the Scriptures, and Proverbs, especially in other places, and Proverbs literally puts them in these groups of wise, foolish, and evil. Okay? A wise person, it says, is the kind of person, certainly has problems, certainly makes mistakes. Correct a wise person, and they get better.
Right.
So they love you, they're grateful, they learn from it, they change, they grow. So what do you do with wise people? Now, a wise person may not be the smartest cookie in the room. There's a difference in intelligence and wisdom.
Right.
But they utilize feedback.
Right.
And they change. But then it goes in the second category, the fool or the mocker. Do not correct a mocker or a fool, lest you incur insults upon yourself.
Right.
How many times you try to tell somebody something, or a donor, or a person, or whoever, and, well, that's because you're not giving me enough resources. You're not giving me enough responsibility. Or what, are you questioning my integrity? What, you don't trust me? And all of a sudden now you're the problem.
It's someone else's fault.
Yeah. Shoot the messenger. Right? It basically finally says, don't even try. you know. And it says they will attack you, they will, all this sort of stuff. And it gives a different prescription for the fool, and that is consequences.
So can a fool become wise?
Absolutely.
Yes. Okay. I didn't. Okay.
See, this is what's so
Consequences
great.
will help get them to the wise.
But the problem is unnecessary endings. Problem is you've been using the wrong methods, buddy. Until, look, great example. Probably one group that should head up all the treatment centers is the IRS. They can get millions of non-performers, procrastinators, excusers, all of a sudden to turn into wise people on April 14th by midnight.
Right.
Because there's reality consequences.
Okay.
Consequences can, not always, but they have hope of changing people. So the problem is you use the wrong method on the wrong group. You've already been confronting the fool or the mocker, the excuser, or the denier for a long time. And so then it's time, with the wise person, you say, hey, can you change this, talk about this problem, it gets better. But with the fool, you come in and say something different. You know, Joe, how I've been, been talking about, if you're going to be the worship leader, we got to have the song by Wednesday or by Tuesday or whatever it is, because we got to organize the service, and it's just coming on Saturday afternoon a lot of times, and that's too late. You know, I've talked to you about that. You remember we talked about that? Well, I'm not going to bother you with that anymore. I don't want to talk about that anymore. We're going to have a different conversation. I've been talking about the problem, and now I don't want to talk about the problem anymore. I want to talk about a different problem. The problem is that talking to you about problems doesn't help. So I'm not going to do it anymore. What I'm going to do is, I can't get you to do it, but I can keep our team and our services from being affected by it.
Right.
So here's what I'm going to do. If this happens again, then I can't continue to allow us to be affected by your performance. We have a mission here. And so if it happens again, I need to protect the service. And so you're just going to get to go maybe work at a church that likes to get it on Saturday. Or I can give you a month to turn it around, and then we can do that. But we're not going to talk about it anymore. The talking time has ended. Why? Because it's not helping. Mm-hmm. And that's when people self-select. I have a chapter in the book called No More Mr. Bad Guy.
Right. The
magic of self-selection. I don't have to be the bad guy and fire Joey.
Right. Because Joey chose through his
behavior.
Well,
I'm going to tell Joey that whoever is the worship leader, here's what we need from that seat. Okay? I hope that's you. You are so talented. Mm-hmm. I really want that to be you. But here's the requirements. Now, I want that to be you. And if you choose to do those things, you'll be in that seat. If you don't choose that, you choose not to, that's totally up to you. But you can't sit in that seat. So you get to choose. And I hope you don't feel like, I'm being mean to you. I'm just a steward of that chair.
Right.
So it's up to you. Now the third category, evil people, I talked about, fools hurt a lot of people. They're not trying to. Evil people have destruction in their hearts.
Right.
They really like it to get revenge. How many times have you ever seen somebody, I will bring you and this place down.
Right.
And they leave, and the way you talk to wise people, you have consequences mm-hmm. with fools. Mm-hmm. With evil people, I love the old Warren Zevon song. Remember Warren Zevon?
No.
Werewolves from London.
Oh, yeah, yes.
Warren Zevon had this song called Lawyers, Guns, and Money.
Right.
And it started, well, I won't sing the song, but it's about a bunch of scenarios where he gets himself caught up with some really bad people.
Right.
And he says, Dad, get me out of this sin, lawyers, guns, and money. That means it's time to go into protection mode. I will only talk to you through my attorney. That's where that phrase came from. I'm not talking to you anymore.
Right.
We're done. But I've also got to protect the ministry. The law is for the lawless, the scripture says.
Right.
Guns. And there's a lot of domestic violence where some women got to get you to a shelter, and sometimes you might have to call the police. Because force is going to be needed. Or at least the threat of force. And this is going to cost some money. So sometimes that's why churches have general councils.
Right.
But there's a reality of there are some people that are out to get you, and you've got to protect yourselves. Jesus said, do not cast what is holy, or do not give what is holy to dogs. So say trample you. Do not give your pearls before swine.
Right.
There's a protection mode. Shake the dust off of your feet. Get out of there.
Right.
Here's the last thing I want to do. I don't want to turn everybody into diagnosticians where they got to read the tea leaves in the crystal ball and figure out, well, are they evil or this and that, how bad, or is there hope? You don't have to do that. What you've got to do is you've just got to deal with the reality that presents itself. And so when the non-performance is there, you have to have consequences. When the evil is there, you have to protect yourself. You're not going to resolve sovereignty and free will.
Right.
You're not going to resolve nature, nurture. You just have to present when somebody, or deal with, if somebody's hitting you in the face, it's not time to worry about, well, what's going to happen if I stop them? You got to stop the destruction of your ministry, or the family, or the person. That's all you have to do.
Right.
And then you let the path and the process work what it's going to work.
Right.
But in church life, you bring up a really important point. How many times have you seen a church, and it may be somebody's not performing or whatever, but somebody comes in who's got some brains, and they say, we need to start measuring some things and see what kind of ROI we're getting on this investment in this ministry or this whatever. And we need to start having performance reviews, or we need to start talking, somebody's going to stand up. Everybody's heard this phrase. Oh, wait a minute. You're trying to run this like a business. This is a ministry.
Oh, please talk about this. Yes. I hear this all the time.
Of course you do. To which I always say, you're right. So is God's business the only one that can suck, that's allowed to not perform? Is that what you're telling me? And here's what I would say about that. There is no such thing in the New Testament as a non-performance-based culture. It's just not there.
Amen. Yeah.
And people have a sub-biblical view of grace. They think grace is just allowing things.
Cheap grace.
Grace
Bonhoeffer
is
wrote about it. Yeah.
What's that?
Bonhoeffer wrote about cheap grace versus costly grace. It cost Jesus his life.
It did. Grace is unmerited favor, which means I'm going to try to help you, and I'm going to give to you, and that's my role. Your role is to receive the grace and have the fruits of the grace. Okay? So you go to the New Testament, and what do you see? We're called in through grace, and there will be grace throughout. Just as you have received Christ Jesus, so walk in him. And we have grace for failure. We have grace for mistakes. We have grace for a learning curve. He has already made perfect those whom he is making perfect, Hebrews says.
Right.
So we start there. But then what it says is, let's say you got 3 positions in your church, and you give responsibility to this one, and they turn 5 into 10. What do? We're going to give more to that person. Mm-hmm. There's another one that has a job kind of at the 2 level, and they turn that 2 into 4. Mm-hmm. We're going to give them more. Mm-hmm. But there's one that doesn't do anything from their position. What does the New Testament say? I'm going to take your job away from you and give it to someone who performs.
Right.
John 15, back to Titus, rejected, divisive person.
Right.
Do not lay hands on any man too quickly.
Right.
That's not a dating verse. That's a performance verse. Right? We got to vet them.
Right.
And the New Testament knows nothing about a lack of stewardship of what you've been put over to steward, or it will be taken away. Now, here's the thing. Pastors and church leaders are stewards.
Of course they are.
And if you're letting somebody squander the vision or squander the culture of the church with bad behavior or do divisiveness,
mm-hmm. Yeah.
Performance.
Thank you for that.
We have to have performance standards to get better.
Thank you for that. I completely agree.
And then people say, well, what about grace? Grace is bringing to people what they need that they don't possess in order to perform. But
right.
Throughout all of the message of the gospel, and in the created order, a mother can bring milk to the baby. Mm-hmm. They've got to suck. And when they don't, we bring grace. We do things to stimulate them neurologically to get them to do it. But there's always work involved. Mm-hmm. So mm-hmm. if you're not requiring that work, you're not going to see growth, you're not going to see maturity, you're not going to see results.
Right.
But it's the grace that comes in, gives the things needed for them to do that.
Right. One last question. You talk about grief towards the end of the book when there's a necessary ending. So if a church is, let's say, makes the decision that it's time to end a ministry that we've been doing for 30 years because it's not working anymore and we need to make room for a new ministry, how do they grieve that well? Or if they're letting a staff person go that has lots of folks that love them, but they fall into that foolish or evil category and they need to be let go. How does a church grieve that well?
Well, those scenarios in some ways are different because this is a real pain in the butt for you church guys and for people in business. In the legal environment that we live in, sometimes you have to let somebody go for cause.
Right.
And you can't talk about it.
Right.
And half the place really loved Joey. Mm-hmm. How could they do this to, and how can, and so now these victims, now you're the perpetrator, and they go rescue the victim. So now you got to.
I can't tell you how many times this happens in a local church. All the time.
All the time.
All the time.
All the time. It happens in businesses. We just got to tell you, Joey's no longer here. Thank him for his service. Well, what? And they demand answers.
Right.
And you tell them, I'm sorry, we really don't talk about personnel things. That's a legal protection. And
right.
They just can't accept it. So that's a little different than we're going to shut down a ministry.
It is. I agree.
Okay, because we're going to bring those people into the vision and try to give all the reasons. But let me go back to the first scenario. Your best successes in going through that will not be handling it well when you go through it, that happened in a soil. If you have been building in your teams and culture and people a soil of trust, they trust your leadership.
Right.
When things happen they don't understand, they go, gosh, it makes no sense to me. How could they do that? But I know Jay and I know the elders, they must have had a good reason. So the best thing, I just wrote a book on trust, and if you, important dynamics. The most important thing that you can do as a leader before anything else is to build a culture of trust. Because you can slay people and yet I will trust you.
Right.
See, ultimately, that was God's answer.
Right.
He didn't tell Job why. And he was in the heavenly courts, and the board knew.
Right.
Right? And then Job, because he was reminded of who God was, though he slay me, yet I will trust him. And throughout the Bible, ultimately, we don't get answers to a lot of suffering. And the one that God continues to give is trust me. Why? Because I have seen your trustworthiness.
Right.
You have been vetted.